What the man didn't know though, was that after they'd crossed the line a few times, Zeynep started to panic. She hadn't gotten pregnant, and it was really starting to stress her out. Eventually, she confided in her co-worker at the Minimarket, a man named Nir. Nir agreed to help Zeynep, and the two of them ended up doing the same thing several times on different days, in the warehouse above the shop. Afterward, Zeynep found out she was finally pregnant. Hey there, welcome back to our channel. Today, we've got another chilling real-life story to share with you. This one comes from the city of Igda, Turkey. It's a story that dives deep into some dark, complicated relationships. Stepmother, stepdaughter, and even co-workers. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for this one. So, what exactly happened in this case? Let's get into it and find out. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And hey, share this story with your friends too. Now, let's get into it. This story takes place in the city of Igda, Turkey. The year is 1963, and a man named Mustafa was born. Igda is a city in the eastern part of Turkey, not far from the Armenian border. It's the capital of Igda province. Mustafa grew up and eventually became a soldier in the Turkish army, starting his service in 1982. When he was younger, he was often stationed as a peacekeeper in the Middle East, a region known for its conflicts. In 1990, Mustafa got married, and a year later, he was blessed with a son, Barak. According to Barak, his father had a temper, and sadly, he often took it out on his mother. In 2003, Mustafa was severely injured while on duty but managed to recover and return to his military post. As the only child, Barak would spend a lot of time with his mother when his father was away on assignments, but in 2010, tragedy struck. Barak's mother passed away due to kidney failure, leaving him to live alone in their home. After his mother's death, Barak focused on his studies and eventually started working at a hospital as an administrator in the emergency department. He rented a small room near his workplace, but still came home once a week to clean and check on the house since his father was rarely around. Their relationship was distant, and Mustafa preferred to meet his son outside the house, mostly to talk about work. In 2015, Barak introduced his father to Eileen, a girl he had fallen in love with. The two hit it off, and soon enough, they got married. Mustafa was supportive of the marriage and even helped finance the reception. Barak and Eileen got married in May 2015, both at just 24 years old. But things took a strange turn just a few months later. In 2015, Mustafa went to visit the family of his former army superior, Kerem. Kerem had passed away in 2013 due to illness, but Mustafa still wanted to check in on his family and settle some unfinished business. Back when Kerem was alive, he had asked Mustafa to help with some large medical bills, which had resulted in a debt of about 500 million rupiah, roughly $35,000. Mustafa had expected the debt to be paid back, but Kerem's family had been struggling financially, and the payments were nowhere to be found. Frustrated by the situation, Mustafa decided to take matters into his own hands. He brought a lawyer and police officers to Kerem's house to seize the property. Kerem's wife, understandably, was heartbroken. A final deadline was given for the debt to be settled, 2 weeks, as decided by the neighborhood leader, who was trying to mediate the situation. This situation eventually reached Barak's ears. Since he didn't live with his father, he decided to visit Mustafa and try to reason with him. Barak, seeing the whole situation from a different angle, urged his father to be more flexible. After all, his dad had plenty of money and no real dependents, and his salary was more than enough to cover their needs. But Mustafa was furious and didn't take kindly to being meddled with. However, something did catch his attention. When he had visited Kerem's house the day before, he couldn't help but notice that Kerem's second daughter, Zeynep, was incredibly beautiful. This stuck with him, and soon he came up with an idea. He approached Kerem's widow with a proposal. What if her daughter became his wife, and in exchange, the debt would be considered paid off? Of course, Kerem's wife rejected the offer immediately, but to Mustafa's surprise, Zeynep agreed. She figured it would be impossible to ever pay off her late father's debts. Plus, if the house was confiscated, where would her mother and sister live? After a lot of back and forth, a decision was made. Zeynep would marry Mustafa. So, in December 2015, when Mustafa was 52 and Zeynep was just 26, half his age, they tied the knot. After their marriage, it was revealed that Zeynep was actually a widow and had a young child from her previous relationship. But Mustafa, already infatuated with her, agreed to let the child live with her mother. So, Zeynep settled into her new life, which wasn't too difficult since her husband was often away for work. To fill her time, she continued working at a local mini-market. Her relationship with her stepson, Barak, and his wife, Eileen, was surprisingly good. They spent time together often, and Zeynep even helped Eileen with advice, especially since Eileen was 4 months pregnant at the time. The two women would frequently stay at Mustafa's large home, so Zeynep wouldn't feel lonely. By March 2017, nearly a year and a half into their marriage, Zeynep still hadn't gotten pregnant, which upset Mustafa. He wanted a child badly and began to accuse his wife of being infertile. Reluctantly, Zeynep took him to the doctor. The results were a blow to Mustafa's ego. It turned out that Zeynep was perfectly healthy, but the doctor explained that Mustafa's stress and physical exhaustion from his demanding army duties were likely to blame for his infertility. This news sent Mustafa into a rage. He had fathered a child with his first wife, so how could this be happening? The doctor tried to calm him down, but it only fueled his anger. When they returned home, Mustafa was furious with Zeynep. He ordered her to visit another doctor the next day, but this time, she should go alone. There was no need for him to be there. He was healthy, he insisted. He pressured Zeynep to continue seeking treatment to become fertile, demanding that she follow all available therapies. Zeynep, not daring to argue, simply nodded in agreement. Zeynep felt more and more anxious as time went on. Her husband's threats grew harsher, telling her that if she wasn't pregnant by the end of 2017, he would divorce her, and all of her father's debts would come back to haunt them. The tension between them built up into a big argument, but Zeynep lost the battle once again. So when Mustafa left for another trip, she turned to Barak and his wife, Eileen, who by then had a 1-year-old son. Eileen suggested that Zeynep see another doctor, and promised Barak would show the test results to his father to prove that Zeynep was perfectly fertile. They tried that, but Mustafa was still stubborn, continuing to blame his wife for everything. He refused to visit another doctor. Feeling the pressure to save her family from further harm, Eileen suddenly came up with a rather strange idea. She suggested that Zeynep pay a man to get her pregnant so her father-in-law would finally be satisfied. This seemed to be the only way, especially since Mustafa refused to budge. "Let's just trick him," Eileen said, convinced it was the only solution. Zeynep, though hesitant, found herself thinking about it more and more. She wanted to be loyal, but Mustafa's threats about making her family homeless were all too real. Eileen's idea, while unconventional, seemed like the best option. So, they began to discuss the plan in secret. Zeynep promised not to tell anyone, especially not her own family, and they began searching for a man through dating apps and social media who would be willing to help for money. But after a few days of searching, Zeynep began to second-guess herself. Some of her friends warned her about the risks of finding a man through these platforms. They pointed out that there was no guarantee the guy would be healthy, and she worried about the possibility of him carrying an infectious disease. So, Zeynep decided to abandon the idea. Then, in August 2017, Zeynep finally told her husband that she was 3 months pregnant. But instead of the happiness she hoped for, Mustafa was furious. He couldn't believe it. "I'm infertile. How can your stomach be growing?" he shouted. Feeling trapped in her own lies, Zeynep was at a loss for words. It seemed clear that Mustafa was just playing a game, trying to force her into a corner so he could collect on his debts. He wanted to separate, and he was using the pregnancy as another reason to tear their relationship apart. Zeynep couldn't believe what was happening. She had married Mustafa with good intentions, to help him settle his debts, but now it seemed like everything she'd done had been in vain. She'd been loyal to him, even serving him in every way he asked, but now she was left questioning if it was all for nothing. Then, in October 2017, when she was 19 weeks pregnant, Mustafa took things a step further. He demanded that Zeynep take a DNA test. The results came back with shocking news. 40% of the DNA matched Mustafa's. This only fueled Mustafa's suspicion, and he became convinced that it was Barak, his own son, who had been involved with his wife. The next day, Mustafa pressured Zeynep to confess, and she finally admitted the truth. Furious, Mustafa stormed over to his son's house. Barak, who had been silent up until that point, fearing his wife's anger, finally told his father everything. He explained that he had only tried to help Zeynep, who was facing constant pressure from Mustafa. The idea of helping her had been to protect her family from losing their home. Eileen was shocked by her husband's confession, but the real shock came when Mustafa pulled out a gun and shot Barak. After the shot rang out, Mustafa fled the scene. Barak, though gravely wounded, was taken to the hospital and spent 2 weeks recovering. Miraculously, he pulled through and eventually made it home. He immediately apologized to Eileen, explaining that he never intended to betray their love. He justified his actions by saying that he was just trying to help save Zeynep's family from losing everything, fearing for her life and the lives of her mother and sister. But what Barak didn't know was that Zeynep, after multiple attempts to get pregnant, had become increasingly anxious because nothing was happening. Eventually, she confided in her co-worker Nir, and he agreed to help. They ended up being intimate several times in the warehouse above the Minimarket, and it was through that Zeynep found out she was pregnant. Zeynep, already overwhelmed by the situation, finally came clean to her family about everything. Her parents were heartbroken as they learned of their daughter's sacrifice to protect her family. The truth was raw, but they understood why she'd done it, to keep them from being homeless. The police seemed to show little urgency in tracking Mustafa down. It could have been due to his position in the army or perhaps because he had powerful connections. The authorities' lack of action frustrated many, especially after Barak had forgiven his father for everything. People in the community were calling for faster action to find Mustafa, who was rumored to be hiding out at a relative's home in the Karakoyunlu area. A month passed, and on November 15, 2017, Zeynep, along with her brother Yusuf, went to gather her belongings from Mustafa's house. To her surprise, Mustafa was there. When she told him to surrender, he claimed that his legal problems were over and that he was untouchable, immune from the law. A heated argument broke out, and Yusuf, enraged, grabbed a knife from the kitchen and attacked Mustafa from behind. Zeynep pleaded with her brother to stop, but Yusuf didn't listen, and Mustafa, at 54, was killed in the attack. Afterward, Zeynep accompanied her brother to the police to surrender. Barak was pretty shocked when Yusuf suddenly turned out to be the one who attacked Mustafa. He had thought everything was done and over with, and just wanted his father to disappear for good. But then, Zeynep told him about Mustafa showing up unexpectedly, and that really set him off. Barak thought after the attack, Mustafa would at least feel some regret, but instead, he just blamed everyone else and acted like he was in the right. Even though Barak himself was still working on fixing things with his wife after all that had happened. Mehmet, the lawyer handling the case, explained in court that Yusuf's actions were totally unplanned and happened in a moment of panic. He was just trying to protect his sister, who was pregnant, from an attack by her husband. The weapon Yusuf used wasn't even something he brought with him. He just grabbed it from the kitchen during the chaos. He was only trying to defend himself, especially since the authorities hadn't been able to catch Mustafa after all this time. It had been over a month, and Mustafa was still out there, making it dangerous for Zeynep, who was still hated by her husband. Then, on October 17, 2017, at the Igdir City District Court, the judge and jury found Yusuf guilty of assault leading to death, but with the mitigating circumstance of self-defense. The man, who had just graduated from college, was sentenced to 13 years in prison. Meanwhile, Barak managed to patch things up with his wife, Eileen, and they decided to move to Tuzluka, where Eileen's family lived. The reason? Eileen was pretty upset with Zeynep for what she considered betrayal, and it was creating tension at home. As for Zeynep, she gave birth to her child and ended up living in the house that Mustafa had left behind. But things were still a bit complicated. Eileen asked Zeynep not to tell the child about his real father, which made things even more confusing. Zeynep had been with 2 different men around the same time, so no one really knew for sure who the child's biological father was. It was a messy situation, to say the least. What lessons can we take from this story?